Before I tell you what happened, you need to know this. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears the face of family, the smile of someone who claims to love you. On that night, at a family gathering meant to celebrate unity, I was branded an intruder in the very house I paid for, in the very life I held together. And what I revealed afterward changed everything. It started with one word. A word that pierced deeper than a knife, not because of its volume, but because of the place it came from. Intruder. That's what my mother-in-law called me, loud enough for everyone in that crowded living room to hear, her wine glass trembling slightly as she raised it, her lips curling around the insult as if she had been waiting years to let it out. I remember the exact second it happened. The room was warm, too warm, filled with bodies and noise and the heavy scent of food that had been cooking since morning. My husband's cousins laughed near the kitchen, children darted around with sticky hands, and the old radio in the corner played a song that had been recycled at every family gathering for decades. I was standing near the dining table, holding a tray of roasted chicken I had spent all morning preparing, when she said it. Intruder. At first, the word didn't register. I thought I had misheard. But then she turned her gaze directly on me, her eyes sharp, her smile stretched too thin, and repeated it, softer this time, more deliberate. You don't belong here. You're just an intruder. The room shifted, conversations dimmed, heads turned one by one toward me. The tray in my hands felt suddenly heavier, my arms trembling as if the chicken bones had turned to lead. My husband froze where he stood, his glass halfway to his lips, his eyes darting between his mother and me. And in that suspended moment, I felt my heart crack open, not because I hadn't heard worse, but because I had sacrificed everything to stand in that room, to be part of that family, to keep it alive. No one spoke at first. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the scrape of a chair as one of the uncles shifted uncomfortably, the high-pitched giggle of a child who hadn't noticed the tension. My chest burned, my throat tightened, but I refused to let her see me crumble. I looked around the room, scanning the faces of the very people I had fed, clothed, supported. In the corner, my sister-in-law stood in the dress I had bought her last Christmas when she couldn't afford one. My father-in-law leaned on the cane I had paid for after his surgery. Even the roof above our heads, the one my mother-in-law pretended belonged solely to her legacy, was held up by the mortgage payments I had been making month after month. Every brick, every tile, every meal on the table had my fingerprints on it. And yet here I was, being reduced to an intruder. My hands shook, but I set the tray down carefully, the sound of the dish hitting the table echoing louder than I expected. My husband finally moved, his voice breaking through the tension. "Mom, that's enough." But she waved him off, her eyes never leaving mine. She thinks she owns this family. She thinks she belongs here. But she doesn't. She will never be one of us. I felt the heat rise in my face, a mixture of rage and humiliation. For years, I had bitten my tongue at her comments, brushed off her digs, convinced myself that patience would earn me respect. But that night, something inside me snapped. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, and all I could think was, they need to know the truth, all of them, right here, right now. My husband reached for my hand under the table, but I pulled it away. My voice came out steady, sharper than I intended, slicing through the silence like glass shattering. "Do you want to know who the real intruder is? The real stranger in this house?" The room went still. Forks froze halfway to mouths. A child dropped a toy, the plastic clattering against the tile. My mother-in-law raised her chin, daring me. "Go ahead," she sneered. "Enlighten us." And in that moment, standing in the house I had paid for, surrounded by the family I had carried on my back for years, I realized I was done being silent. The moment the words left her mouth, I felt something shift inside me. For years I had swallowed my anger, polished my smile, played the role of the quiet supporter. But now, staring at her smug expression and the hush that had fallen over the entire room, I knew I couldn't keep living in silence. The weight of sacrifice pressed against my ribs, begging to be released. I took a deep breath, and my voice cut through the tension like a blade. Do you know who's been paying the mortgage on this house for the last 4 years? Do you know who kept the lights on when the bills stacked up and the checks from your husband's pension weren't enough? Do you know who bought the very food you're all eating tonight? My eyes swept the room, locking on each face, one by one. Me. Every single time it was me. Gasps rippled across the room. My husband's younger cousin, who had just stuffed a mouthful of potatoes, froze mid-chew. An aunt set her glass down so abruptly the wine sloshed over the rim. My sister-in-law's eyes darted down to the floor, shame flickering across her face, as if she knew deep down what I was saying was true. My mother-in-law laughed, sharp and bitter. Don't exaggerate. We've always managed. Managed? I repeated, my voice shaking now, not with fear, but with fury. Was it managing when I covered the 3 months of missed payments during the pandemic, while you sat here pretending everything was fine? Was it managing when I handed over my entire savings account to keep this house from foreclosure, while you bragged to the neighbors about how strong your family was? Her smile faltered. The cousins exchanged uneasy glances. My father-in-law shifted in his seat, his hand tightening around the cane. And suddenly, it wasn't just my voice filling the room. It was the truth echoing in the silence, undeniable and raw. I stepped closer to the table, my hands gripping the back of a chair. I have receipts, bank transfers, statements. I have every single record because I kept track of every dollar I poured into this family. When your son lost his job, who covered the bills? Me. When your daughter needed money for school books, who paid? Me. When your husband needed surgery, who maxed out her credit card to cover what insurance wouldn't? Me. The children, sensing the tension, had gone quiet, retreating to the corners of the room. The adults sat frozen, caught between disbelief and guilt. My husband finally found his voice, low and unsteady. She's telling the truth. All eyes turned to him. He swallowed hard, his hand trembling as he set down his glass. Everything she's saying, it's true. She's been the one holding this family together. Not me. Not you. Her. The words hit like a stone dropped into water, ripples spreading through the room. My mother-in-law's face hardened, her pride wrestling with the truth now laid bare before her. So what? She spat. That doesn't make you family. Money doesn't buy love. It doesn't buy respect. No, I said, my voice steady again. It doesn't. But do you know what else it doesn't buy? Betrayal. Humiliation. Years of sacrifice thrown in my face with one word. Intruder. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, my chest rising and falling in heavy waves. For the first time, they all looked at me, not as a guest, not as a background figure, but as the person who had kept their entire world standing. I saw it then, in their faces. The realization, the shame, the truth that had been hidden under layers of denial. My sister-in-law's eyes brimmed with tears. My father-in-law looked down at his cane, unable to meet my gaze. Even the cousins shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another as if they had finally pieced it all together. But my mother-in-law, she stayed rigid, her jaw clenched, her eyes burning with defiance. And I knew this was just the beginning. Because revealing the truth was one thing, forcing her to acknowledge it was another battle altogether. I straightened my shoulders, the anger inside me no longer burning out of control but sharpening into resolve. I had kept the family afloat in silence for too long. Now it was time for them all to hear just how deep the sacrifices went, and what it had cost me. The air in that living room was thick enough to choke on. I could see it in their faces. The cousins staring at the floor, the aunts pretending to sip from empty glasses, my father-in-law gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles whitened. But no one dared to speak. No one dared to defend her after what I had said. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next blow. I leaned forward, my palms pressing into the table, steadying myself as I let the weight of years spill out of me. Let's go back to 2019, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Remember when the power company sent that disconnection notice? Everyone thought it was a mistake, but it wasn't. Your bill hadn't been paid for 3 months. Who pulled $800 out of her own pocket to keep this house from going dark? Me. And not one of you asked how I managed it. You just sat here, grateful the lights stayed on, while I worked overtime shifts at the clinic to cover it. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the uncles shifted uncomfortably, his fork scraping against the plate. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, when jobs disappeared and the mortgage company started calling, do you know who answered those calls? Do you know who wired $2,365, every last penny from her savings account, to keep the roof over your heads? Me. Not your daughter. Not your son. Not even you, I said, pointing at my mother-in-law. Me. The so-called intruder. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. I could see her pride clashing violently with the truth unraveling in front of everyone. I turned then, my eyes locking on my sister-in-law. She was trembling, her eyes wet, her lips pressed together. And you, I said softly but firmly, when you couldn't afford your school books that semester, when you told everyone you'd figure it out, who slid the envelope with $200 under your door? Do you remember? Or did you choose to forget? Because I remember. I remember watching you cry from relief, telling me you'd pay me back someday. That day never came. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked down, tears dripping onto her lap. And what about the surgery? I continued, my eyes darting to my father-in-law. That cane you're holding right now, the one you lean on every single day, was only possible because the hospital bill got paid. $5,000. On my credit card. And when I sat in that waiting room praying you would pull through, your wife was out there telling everyone the family had it covered. No one had it covered. I did. Gasps echoed again. Sharper this time. One of the cousins whispered, "Is that true?" My father-in-law's eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Guilt, maybe, or shame. And he nodded faintly, confirming it. The silence that followed was heavier than the first. I stood straighter, my chest rising and falling with the force of my own words. My hands shook, but not from weakness, from release, from finally unburdening years of quiet suffering. My husband finally spoke, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on his mother. She's been the one carrying all of us. You know it's true. You've always known. You just never wanted to admit it. Her face twisted, her pride fighting to hold on. Money isn't everything, she spat, her voice trembling. Family isn't about who pays the bills. It's about blood. I laughed, a sound that startled even me. Blood? Don't talk to me about blood when your definition of family is so hollow. Blood didn't keep the lights on. Blood didn't stop the bank from taking this house. Blood didn't buy the food you're eating tonight. If blood was enough, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. The room was silent again. Some of them looked at me with wide eyes, others with shame, but none of them could deny it anymore. The truth was a weight they could no longer shift onto me. I placed both hands flat on the table, leaning in, my voice quieter now, but no less sharp. For years I've been invisible to you. Useful, but invisible. You saw my sacrifices as obligations. You saw my love as weakness. And tonight, you thought you could strip me of everything with one word. Intruder. But let me tell you something. An intruder doesn't build a house. An intruder doesn't keep it standing. An intruder doesn't bleed herself dry for people who never once said thank you. I straightened, my chest heaving, my throat raw. So, if you're still convinced I don't belong here, maybe it's time you all ask yourselves who really does. Her silence didn't last long. Pride has a way of clawing back when it feels cornered, and my mother-in-law was nothing if not proud. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and let out a brittle laugh that sent chills through me. "So what?" she said, her voice slicing through the still air. "So you threw some money around. That doesn't make you one of us. You can't buy your way into this family. You'll never be more than the outsider who married my son." The word outsider stabbed deeper than intruder. Outsider meant exile. Outsider meant no matter what I did, I would always be kept at the edges of their circle, never truly welcomed inside. My throat burned, but I didn't let the tears rise. Not this time. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I stepped closer to her, my voice steady, clear, cutting with each word. Do you really believe this family would still be standing if I hadn't stepped in, over and over again? Tell me, when the bank called about foreclosure, where were you? When the hospital demanded payment before the surgery, where were you? When the electricity company threatened to shut off the lights in the dead of winter, where were you? My hands trembled, but I pointed directly at her. Not here. Not paying. Not saving. Not carrying the weight. That was me. The outsider. She tried to interrupt, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The years of silence were pouring out of me like a flood finally breaking a dam. You sit there, calling me names, humiliating me in front of everyone, while you ignore the truth. Without me, this family would have drowned years ago. Without me, you wouldn't even have this house to sit in tonight. You'd be living with your pride in someone else's basement. A murmur rippled through the room. The aunts exchanged glances. The cousins shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, and my father-in-law lowered his eyes. My sister-in-law wiped her face, her tears no longer hidden. The truth was too heavy now, too loud to be ignored. But my mother-in-law clung to her defiance like a shield. "This is my house," she hissed, her voice shaking but still sharp. "My husband built it with his hands. My children grew up in it. You'll never own that, no matter how many bills you pay." I took a deep breath, my chest rising with the force of the words I had been holding back for years. "You're wrong. This house has my name on it. My money keeps it standing. My work put food on this table. My sacrifices gave your children the chance to breathe, to grow, to live without the fear of losing everything. You want to call me an outsider? Then tell me, what does that make you? Sitting here claiming ownership over something you haven't lifted a finger to save." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she didn't have a response ready. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children had stopped moving, their wide eyes watching me with confusion and awe. My husband finally spoke, his voice low, firm, a tremor of shame running through it. "She's right, Mom. Every word she said is true. She's the one who kept us afloat, and you know it." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother-in-law's face twisted, caught between rage and humiliation, her pride cracking under the weight of her son's admission, but she couldn't take it back. None of them could. The truth was out, raw and unfiltered, and it was mine now. I stood taller, my chest still burning but my resolve solid. "I may not share your blood, but I've given this family more than blood ever has. I've given years of my life, thousands of dollars, countless nights of worry and sacrifice. And if that makes me an intruder, then maybe you should ask yourselves who the real stranger is in this house." The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, charged, alive with the weight of revelation. And for the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth she could no longer deny. The silence after my words was sharp enough to cut. I could feel every eye in the room pressing into me, some filled with guilt, others with disbelief, and a few with something like awe. My mother-in-law sat stiffly, her jaw tight, her fingers clutching the stem of her wine glass as if it were the only thing anchoring her. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I straightened, my hands no longer trembling, my voice stronger with each word. "Do you want to know what's really happening here? You've spent years trying to paint me as the intruder, the outsider, the one who doesn't belong. But the truth is, you've needed me more than you've ever admitted. You've used my silence, my patience, my money as your safety net while you pretended you were still the one holding this family together." A sharp intake of breath came from one of the aunts. My sister-in-law's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as she stared down at her lap. My husband stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, caught between loyalty to his mother and the undeniable truth of my words. I pressed on. Every month when the mortgage notice arrived, who signed the check? Me. Every time groceries ran low, whose debit card swiped at the register? Mine. Every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, every so-called family gathering, it was my money that filled these plates, my hours of work that kept this house warm, My sacrifices that built the illusion you all enjoyed. My mother-in-law's lips curled into a sneer. And you expect us to thank you for doing what a wife is supposed to do? Her words slammed into me, but instead of breaking me, they fueled my fire. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. No, I expect you to acknowledge reality. A wife doesn't pay for her husband's parents' mortgage. A wife doesn't cover her sister-in-law's tuition. A wife doesn't max out her credit card for her father-in-law's medical bills while everyone else looks away. That isn't being a wife. That's being a savior. And you've taken advantage of it for far too long. Gasps rippled through the room again. Louder this time. I saw heads nodding. Small, hesitant at first, but growing as the truth sank in. They knew. Deep down, they had always known. They had simply let her dominate the story. Let her pride erase my role, because it was easier to believe the lie than face the truth. I turned my gaze back to her, my voice sharper now. You've called me names behind my back. You've belittled me at every opportunity. You've made me feel like a guest in the very home I built with my own 2 hands. And tonight, you thought you could humiliate me once more in front of everyone. But not tonight. Tonight, they all get to hear who I really am. And who you really are. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes narrowing, but her silence betrayed her. She had no defense left. Not against the evidence, not against the years of sacrifice now laid bare for all to see. I looked around the room again, meeting each pair of eyes. You've all eaten meals I cooked, sat under a roof I paid for, slept in beds I kept warm with the bills I covered. And still, not once did anyone stop to ask how I was doing. Not once did anyone thank me. You let her control the narrative, let her poison your view of me, because it was easier. But the truth is undeniable now. Without me, this family would have collapsed years ago. Without me, there would be no house, no food, no security. I am not the intruder. I am the foundation. A stunned silence filled the room. I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall, each second stretching into eternity. My husband finally moved, stepping toward me, his voice hoarse. She's right, he said, his eyes on his mother. Every word. We've let her carry us while we looked away. And you've treated her like she's nothing when she's been everything. My mother-in-law flinched, her grip on the wine glass tightening until I thought it might shatter. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of losing control. I stood taller, my chest heaving, my throat raw but my voice unwavering. So call me an intruder again if you want. Say it loud so everyone can hear. But remember this. The real intruder is pride. The real outsider is the one who sits on her throne of denial while someone else keeps her world standing. And tonight, I'm done letting you silence me. The words hung heavy in the air, impossible to erase, impossible to deny. And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted. The power she had held over me, over all of us, had cracked. The silence was unbearable, and I could see it eating at her. My mother-in-law had built her entire identity on control, of the family, of the stories told at this table, of the hierarchy she ruled like a queen on a crumbling throne. And now, in front of everyone, her grip was slipping. Her knuckles whitened around the stem of the wine glass, and finally she slammed it down so hard it cracked at the base. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice trembling more from desperation than authority. Every head in the room jerked toward her. The cousins stopped breathing. The children clutched each other in the corner. She stood now, her body rigid, her voice rising as she tried to claw back what she thought was hers. "You think money makes you family? You think paying a few bills makes you the owner of this house? This is mine." "Mine! My husband built it. My blood runs through these walls, and no outsider will ever take that from me." Her words echoed, raw and venomous. For a moment, the room shrank back, as if her fury had sucked the oxygen from the air. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. Not this time. I rose from my seat, slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of every eye following me. My heart pounded in my chest, but my voice came out calm, steady, slicing through her rage like a blade through cloth. "You call it yours," I said, my hands gripping the back of the chair before me. "But tell me, what did you build? What have you paid for in the last 10 years? This house would have been gone. Sold to the bank? Swallowed in foreclosure, if not for me. The food on this table tonight was bought with my hands. The lights shining overhead? Paid with my overtime shifts. The roof above your head when you sleep soundly? It's not your pride that kept it standing. It was my sacrifice." Her face twisted, her lips trembling, but I pressed on, my voice rising with each word. "You think you can shame me? Humiliate me? You've called me outsider, intruder, worthless. But I am the one who kept your family from drowning. I am the one who carried the weight while you pointed your finger from the sidelines. And you dare stand here and pretend you're the queen of a kingdom you haven't lifted a finger to save?" The cousins exchanged glances, whispers flitting through the room. My sister-in-law covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. My father-in-law sat frozen, eyes glistening with something like regret. My husband, pale and tight-lipped, didn't try to stop me this time. He knew better. He knew it was too late for silence. My mother-in-law's chest heaved, her breath ragged. She tried again, her voice breaking now. "Blood is what matters. Not money, not sacrifices. Blood is what makes a family." I shook my head slowly, my eyes locked on hers. "No. Respect is what makes a family. Gratitude is what makes a family. Love, loyalty, truth, that's what binds people together. Blood means nothing if it's poisoned with pride and cruelty. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. Blood doesn't excuse humiliation. And tonight, blood doesn't save you." Gasps rippled through the room. For the first time, her power cracked visibly. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. But she found none. Even the cousins who once laughed at her jokes looked away, ashamed. The truth had shifted the ground beneath her feet, and she was stumbling. I stepped closer, my voice quieter now, but sharper than ever. "You called me an intruder in front of everyone. You tried to strip me of my place here, to reduce me to nothing. But the truth is, without me, you would have nothing. This house, this food, this security, it would all be gone. You call me an intruder, but I am the foundation. And foundations don't beg for permission to exist." The words landed heavy, final. She sank back into her chair, her hands trembling, her face pale. The silence that followed was different now. Not suffocating, not fearful, but heavy with truth. The room belonged to me, and for the first time she knew it. The silence didn't last. It cracked slowly, like glass under pressure, as whispers rippled through the room. I could see the cousins exchanging glances, their eyes wide, some filled with shock, others with something like relief, as if they had always suspected the truth but never dared to say it aloud. My sister-in-law was the first to break, her voice trembling, soft but unmistakable. "She's right." All eyes turned to her. She sat hunched in her chair, tears streaking her face, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. "I knew it. I knew you helped me more than you ever admitted. Those books, the rent that one semester, I should have asked where it came from, but I didn't want to know. I just let myself believe it was Mom because it was easier." Her voice cracked. "But it wasn't her. It was you." A murmur swept through the room. One of the cousins nodded slowly, almost to himself. "Yeah, when Dad lost his job, didn't she?" He trailed off, looking at me with wide eyes. "It was you, wasn't it? You covered us." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was unraveling on its own now, weaving itself into every corner of the room. My father-in-law cleared his throat, his voice low and heavy. "She did pay the bills. More than once. More than we ever admitted." His eyes flicked to his wife, guilt etched into every line on his face. "We let her do it. We let her carry it all while we pretended everything was fine." The weight of his words fell hard. My mother-in-law flinched, her face pale, her fingers clawing at the armrest of her chair. She shook her head violently. No, you don't get to turn against me. I'm the one who raised you, who built this family with my bare hands. She's twisting things, making herself into a martyr. Don't let her poison you against your own blood." Her desperation filled the room, but I could see it, the cracks spreading in her control. The cousins shifted uncomfortably. The aunts looked at their glasses as though searching for an escape, and my sister-in-law wept openly now, her guilt spilling out in sobs. I straightened, my voice calm but firm, directed at everyone. I didn't want to be a martyr. I didn't keep track of the money because I wanted recognition. I did it because I thought that's what love was. I thought family meant sacrifice. But sacrifice without gratitude, without respect, turns into slavery. And that's what I became here. A servant to pride, to denial, to a woman who would rather call me an intruder than admit I was the one keeping this house alive. The words struck like a bell. The cousins fell silent. My father-in-law bowed his head. Even my husband, who had been frozen in shame for so long, finally lifted his gaze and spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "She's right. I let her carry it all, and I never defended her. Not against you, not against anyone. I let her be invisible." He turned to me then, his eyes glassy. "I'm sorry." The words landed like a stone in my chest. Apologies had come before, but never here, never in front of them all, never with the weight of truth this heavy. I didn't answer. I let the silence hold him accountable. My mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table, her voice sharp, trembling with fury. "You're all fools. She's turning you against me. She'll destroy this family." I stepped closer to her, my voice low but unyielding. "No, I'm not destroying this family. I'm exposing it. I'm pulling down the curtains you've hidden behind for years. If the truth tears this family apart, then maybe it wasn't a family at all. Maybe it was just a kingdom you ruled with pride, waiting for the day someone called it what it really was. A lie." The room went still again, her face blanched, her chest heaving, her authority crumbling before their eyes. And in that stillness, I realized the tide had turned. For the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. She was. Her face twisted as though every word I had spoken had struck her like a slap. Pride will not die quietly, and my mother-in-law had built her whole life on it. She pushed herself up from her chair, her body trembling, her voice breaking into a shriek that rattled the glasses on the table. "This is my house. Do you hear me? Mine. My husband built it brick by brick. My children grew under this roof. And no outsider, no woman who married into this family, will ever take that from me." Her words cracked the air, but they no longer cracked me. Not this time. The rage in her voice sounded less like authority and more like desperation, like someone clawing at sand slipping through her hands. I stood tall, my heart pounding but my voice steady, carrying into every corner of the room. "Your husband built these walls decades ago, yes. But walls mean nothing without someone to keep them standing. And for the last 4 years, that someone has been me. It was my paycheck that kept the mortgage alive when the bank came knocking. It was my credit card that kept the hospital from turning your husband away when he needed surgery. It was my hours, my sweat, my tears that filled this kitchen with food while you played queen in a castle you no longer owned." Gasps filled the room. The cousins leaned forward, hanging on every word. My sister-in-law wept openly now, her hands pressed to her face. My father-in-law sat rigid, his cane tapping nervously against the floor, shame etched deep into the lines of his expression. Even my husband's eyes, tired and glassy, reflected a truth he could no longer deny. I stepped closer, my voice sharper, louder, burning with years of swallowed silence. "You called me an intruder. But tell me, who really intruded on whom? I built this home with my sacrifice, and you sat here and stole credit with your silence. You let me bleed for this family and pretended it was your strength that carried us. You are the intruder in the story of this house, not me." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her hands shook at her sides, her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. None came. The cousins looked away, the aunts bowed their heads. My sister-in-law cried harder. The kingdom she thought she ruled was gone, exposed for the fragile illusion it had always been. I turned to everyone now, not just her, my chest heaving. my voice ringing with finality. You have eaten food I paid for. You have slept under a roof I saved. You have leaned on a life I built with my own 2 hands. And tonight, she tried to erase me with a single word. But look at me. Look at this house. Look at the truth. I am not the intruder. I am the foundation. Without me, there would be nothing. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, but different this time. It wasn't the silence of fear or disbelief. It was the silence of realization. The cousins stared at me with wide eyes. The aunts with shame, the father-in-law with regret, and my husband with something that looked like sorrow. Finally, I turned back to her. She stood there, shaking, pale, her pride shattered. I leaned forward, my voice quiet now but cutting deeper than any shout. So go ahead. Say it again if you dare. Call me an intruder. But remember this. Every brick of this house is mortgaged in my name. Every bill was paid by my hands. Every life in this room has been touched by my sacrifice. I don't need your blood to belong here. I already do. And you can never take that from me. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she had no words, no retort, no weapon left. She sank slowly into her chair, her hands trembling, her gaze fixed on the table. The queen had fallen, and I stood there, taller than I had ever felt in my life, not because I had humiliated her, but because I had finally spoken the truth. The weight of her silence lingered heavy in the room. For years, her voice had been the only one that mattered. Sharp, commanding, drowning out anyone who dared to push back. But now she sat there, small, fragile, her hands trembling against the tablecloth. And for the first time, the family turned away from her and looked at me. It was my sister-in-law who spoke first, her voice quivering. "She's right," she whispered, almost too soft to hear. But then she lifted her head, her eyes red and wet, and said it louder. "She's right. We've all known it deep down. We just let Mom talk over it. We let her convince us." Her lips trembled as she turned to me. "I should have thanked you years ago. For the books, for the clothes, for everything. I don't know why I never did. Maybe I didn't want to face what it said about me. But I see it now." Tears slid hot down my cheeks, not from weakness, but from the release of years of invisibility. Finally, someone had said it aloud. Finally, my sacrifices had a voice beyond my own. One of the cousins shifted, clearing his throat awkwardly. "That Christmas when Dad lost his job," he said quietly. "And we still had gifts under the tree. I thought it was magic. I thought somehow Mom had pulled it off." His gaze dropped. "But it was you, wasn't it?" I nodded slowly, my throat too tight to speak. His eyes filled with shame, and he looked down at his hands. "Thank you," he whispered. The words felt like balm on an open wound. Small, maybe late, but real. Even my father-in-law, usually silent and stiff, spoke, his voice gravelly. "I should have said it long ago. You saved me. You saved this house." I let her take the credit because it was easier than confronting her pride. But I knew. I always knew. His head bowed, his cane tapping lightly against the floor, as if punctuating his guilt. The room seemed to shift in that moment, the center of gravity tilting. For years, everything had orbited around her. But now, eyes turned to me, voices rose for me. The truth wrapped itself around me like a cloak I had earned with blood, sweat, and silence. My husband stepped forward then, his face pale, his jaw tight, his eyes glossy with a shame that seemed to weigh down his shoulders. "She carried us," he said, his voice low but firm. "All of us. And I let her. I let her work herself to exhaustion while I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better. But they didn't, because I didn't make them better. She did. And I never defended her when you tore her down, Mom. Not once." Gasps rippled again, but this time they weren't about me. They were about him, the son finally standing against the mother. My mother-in-law's face drained of color, her authority crumbling in front of the very people she had ruled for so long. He turned to me, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." I held his gaze, my chest heavy. my heart torn between the ache of years lost and the relief of truth finally spoken. I didn't answer. The apology wasn't enough. Not yet. But in that silence, I felt the shift. He wasn't standing behind her anymore. He was standing behind me. The cousins murmured among themselves. Some nodded. Some looked away, ashamed. But the atmosphere was undeniable. The spell she had cast for so long, her dominance, her pride, her version of the truth, was broken. And in its place, there was me. For the first time, I wasn't the background figure carrying the weight in silence. I wasn't the servant, the outsider, the intruder. I was the axis. The one everything revolved around. I stood taller, my voice steady as I spoke one last time. You called me an intruder, but look at me now. Look at all of this. I am not the intruder. I am the reason this family is still standing, and I will never be invisible again. The silence that followed wasn't fear anymore. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. And it was mine. The gathering ended not with laughter or toasts, but with silence heavy as stone. They drifted out one by one, the cousins whispering apologies as they left, the aunts offering awkward hugs that felt more like confessions than comfort. My father-in-law lingered near the door, his eyes glassy, his cane trembling against the hardwood. He started to speak, but I raised a hand. You don't have to, I told him softly. I already know. He nodded, shame bowing his shoulders as he stepped into the night. When the last door closed, I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the remains of the feast. Plates half empty, glasses tipped, crumbs scattered across the tablecloth. It looked less like a celebration and more like an aftermath. And in a way, that's what it was. Not the end of a party, but the end of a reign. The end of her power over me. My husband stood across the room, silent, his face pale. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came. And I realized then that I didn't need them. His silence was its own kind of confession. He had let it go on for too long. He had let me be crushed under the weight of his family's pride, his mother's venom, his own cowardice. And though his apology earlier had cracked something open, it wasn't enough to repair what had been broken. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I walked past him without a word and opened the window. The night air rushed in, cool and clean, carrying the faint sound of crickets and the hum of distant traffic. I breathed it in, filling my lungs with freedom. For years, this house had felt like a cage. But tonight, for the first time, it felt like mine. Not because I had finally been recognized, not because the truth had been forced into the light, but because I had claimed it, with my voice, with my strength, with my refusal to be silent any longer. I thought about her word, intruder, how it had stung when she first said it, how it had burned in my chest like acid. But now, standing here with the cool air brushing against my face, I smiled, because I knew the truth. I wasn't the intruder. I had never been. I was the foundation. I was the one who had built, who had carried, who had sustained. And without me, all of them would have been standing in ruins long ago. I turned back to the empty room, the candle still flickering weakly on the table. Its flame danced against the shadows, fragile but steady, just like me. I whispered the words that had carried me through the darkest nights. You are not weak. You are not disposable. You are not finished. And in that moment, I believed them completely. The family might never look at me the same way again. Maybe they would resent me for shattering the illusion they clung to. Maybe they would try to rebuild the old order once the sting of truth faded. But it didn't matter. Because I had already changed. I had already claimed my dignity, my strength, my place. I was no longer asking for permission to belong. I belonged to myself, and that was enough.